The moment a jackhammer's roar synced with my pulse, I knew this city would rewrite me. I arrived in Pittsburgh at sunrise, rivers blushing gold beneath skeletal bridges, suitcase bruised from 3 layovers and 1 sprint across O'Hare. The air smelled like steel, coffee, and second chances. My new apartment, 3rd floor walk-up, crooked windows, rent I could barely justify, echoed with possibility and bad plumbing. I tossed my duffel on the scuffed hardwood, pressed a palm to the wall, and promised myself I'd make this place feel tender, even if the world outside stayed rough. By 8 a.m., I was downtown, adjusting the plastic ridge of a hard hat that kept sliding over my eyes. First female field engineer on this project, a rehabilitation of a century-old train station, meant 1,000 paper cuts of doubt, most delivered with a smile. The foreman, Gus, barked orders while chewing on a toothpick like it held the blueprints to heaven. When he saw me, he raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're in the right place, miss?" I inhaled, counted the beats of my new metallic heartbeat, and answered, "I'm exactly where the specs say I should be." Nobody clapped. That was fine. I didn't move to be applauded. I moved to prove that the shape of my ambition could be louder than anyone's disbelief. Steel beams overhead glinted like sharpened promises. I traced seams in old stone, imagining the men who laid each block before women could vote. Now here I was, ponytail tucked into a neon orange bandana, reading load calculations and silently rewriting history. Lunch break found me on the Riverwalk, boots dangling over dark water. I texted Mama's selfie, hard hat, grin, skyline. She replied with 3 sparkle emojis and "proud of you, baby girl." I saved the screenshot, just in case tomorrow wasn't as kind. Back on site, the jackhammer started again, rhythmic, relentless. I let its thunder settle into my chest like drums at a protest march. Somewhere between fear and exhilaration, I realized this noise wasn't an enemy, it was an anthem. And I was ready to dance in the rubble. The second morning began with rain that didn't so much fall as hover, cool mist threading through girders and settling on eyelashes like caution. Gus growled a weather report, flash flood watch by noon, while slapping duct tape over the map where I'd sketched drainage adjustments the night before. He didn't mean offense. Tape was just his love language. Still, I peeled the corner back and traced a red circle around the lowest footing. "Water's going to pool here," I said. "If we reroute the temporary pumps, we'll save ourselves a weekend of bailing." Gus eyed me, the kind of stare that measures whether truth has the right credentials. Then he shrugged. "Show me." So I did. Boots squelching in mud that smelled of ancient coal, I led the crew to the sump pit, recalculated slope with my tablet, and coaxed 2 laborers to shift hoses 15 degrees east. Simple geometry, but in construction prophecy is worthless without proof. By 10 o'clock the sky cracked open, gullies gushed like broken hydrants. Everyone scrambled for cover, everyone except the sump pit, which swallowed the runoff exactly as predicted. Gus watched it, jaw working on that eternal toothpick, until finally he barked, "Well, I'll be damned," as though all were hazardous material. Word travels fast on a job site. At lunch, a welder named Bree slid onto the bench beside me, steel-toed boots knocking mine. "Saw what you did out there," she said, voice low but electric. Nice to have another woman making the suits look slow. We clinked thermoses, her chamomile to my black coffee, and traded stories of underestimated Mondays. Bree had earned her welding certs while pregnant with twins, a detail she delivered like punctuation. Firm, undeniable, period. I felt my spine straighten in response, grateful for the silent sisterhood forming between rebar and rivets. That afternoon, the client's rep, crisp blazer, mud-free shoes, appeared for a progress walk. He addressed every question to Gus, even when I answered first. On the 4th deflection, Bree coughed loud enough to rattle scaffolding and said, "Maybe try looking at the engineer when she speaks." The rep flushed crimson, eyes bouncing to mine in startled apology. I met his gaze, steady, refusing to rescue him from his discomfort. Respect, I'd learned, isn't granted, it's engineered, beam by beam. As dusk fell, generators hummed lullabies, and the site lights painted everything amber. I lingered at the railing overlooking the river, letting the day's victories settle like warm concrete. The rain had stopped, leaving the air scented with wet rust and possibility. Somewhere a freight horn cried, deep and distant, echoing the promise I'd made upon arrival, to carve space where none existed and call it home. Day 3 cracked open with a sunrise the color of a healing bruise, violet fading to hopeful pink. I woke before my alarm, heart buzzing with some impossible mixture of dread and delight. The forecast promised clear skies, but inside the trailer my inbox thundered. An overnight email from corporate, budget cuts, reevaluated timelines, value engineering. I translated that into plain English. Someone, somewhere wanted us to shave off costs by trimming corners I'd sworn to reinforce. I marched across gravel to the south platform where old brick met new steel. My mentor from HQ, Denise, FaceTimed me, squinting from a fluorescent cubicle 2 time zones west. "They'll pressure you to swap to thinner plate," she warned. "Don't budge. Safety's a hill worth dying on." Her voice steadied me like a level against a trembling beam. Mid-morning, a crane stalled, hydraulic glitch. I climbed the ladder to the operator cab, fingers numb despite July heat. Leon, the operator, was panicking at lost time. Together we traced the fault to a corroded coupling the previous crew had patched with optimism and duct tape. I radioed Gus for a replacement. He grumbled but delivered. While we waited, Leon confessed softly that years ago a jammed boom had cost him 2 coworkers and a lifetime of nightmares. "Thank you for climbing up," he said, not meeting my eyes. I squeezed his shoulder, aware that courage often looks like maintenance records and double checks. At lunch, Bree and I claimed a patch of shade, boots off, socks steaming. She told me her twins had a science fair next week, papier-mâché volcanoes, and she dreaded missing their eruption. I promised to cover her Saturday shift if it meant she could be front row mom. The pact felt like pouring concrete into the cracks patriarchy left, small but solid. By dusk the crane swung true, plates stayed thick, and the river caught last light like molten glass. I logged my notes, inhaled the metallic evening, and whispered thanks to every woman who'd braced walls before me. Tomorrow, I knew, the budget hawks would circle again. But tonight our sight, stood firm, and so did I. At dawn a tugboat's horn sliced the hush, as if reminding every stubborn dreamer the city was already clocked in. I laced my boots to that rhythm and walked to the site rehearsing no in 3 different diplomatic tones. Corporate sent 2 executives to bargain over steel thickness, and I intended to be immovable granite disguised as polite conversation. They arrived in matching navy suits, shoes polished enough to scare dust. I guided them along catwalks where welds still glowed faint orange. "80K side plate is overspec'd," one insisted, tie flapping in the draft like a white flag he hadn't realized he'd raised. I unrolled drawings, pointed at load paths, cited the wind tunnel study I'd commissioned after hours. "You can pay for steel now," I said, "or pay for litigation forever." Gus, silent beside me, finally grunted approval, his version of a standing ovation. The suits retreated to crunch numbers someplace cleaner. Adrenaline lingered, so I climbed to the roof truss for air. From up there, Pittsburgh looked like a gear turning inside a universe of water and hills. My phone buzzed, a calendar ping I'd almost forgotten. Women in Trades happy hour, 6 p.m., a bar converted from an old streetcar depot. I hesitated, fatigue pressed heavy. Then I pictured Bree's twins stomping vinegar volcanoes and realized solidarity is muscle. You keep it strong by showing up. The depot's brick walls radiated stories when I arrived, cheeks still streaked with soot. Inside, carpenters, electricians, pipefitters filled the cavernous space with laughter that sounded like hammers on steel, purposeful rising. We shared war tales, bathroom lines shorter in men's restrooms we commandeered, gloves sized for hands not considered. A mason named Tasha taught me a trick for easing rebar ties with a loop of baling wire. I scribbled it on a napkin like treasure. On the walk home, night settled purple over the Monongahela. I passed the station skeleton, cranes asleep against the sky, and felt an almost maternal surge. We were raising more than a building here. We were raising proof. And tonight, proof felt possible, radiant, and ours. Some days crack open like fresh plaster, others split like glass. Friday did the latter. We were setting the final edge beams when the ground trembled, a vibration too heavy to be mere traffic. I felt it first through my boots, a dull reverberation climbing my calves, and then I heard the shout. "Stop! All stop!" Leon's voice echoed off every column. The crane's boom froze mid-arc, dangling 5 tons of steel above the old ticket hall. I sprinted toward the commotion. A water main deep beneath the foundation had ruptured, swirling clay into a viscous soup. The backfill we'd relied on for stability was liquefying by the second, and one support pier had dropped half an inch, just enough to compromise the beam alignment, but not yet enough to collapse. My pulse hammered. A single misstep and we'd undo months of work, or worse, bury someone. I snatched the radio. "Lockdown Zone C. Evacuate non-essential crew. Gus, meet me at Pier 7 with the transit level stat." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Within minutes, hard hats bobbed toward muster points. Gus arrived, jaw tight, transit slung over one shoulder. Together we confirmed the pier's settlement, 14 millimeters and sinking. He cursed softly. I did the math. If we could relieve the load and grout the void before evening temperatures cooled the soil, shrinking it further, we might salvage the footing. Corporate would want 30 signatures and a committee, but water knows nothing of paperwork. "Authorize emergency micropiles," I told Gus. "I'll file the deviation later." His eyes searched mine, weighing risk against trust. Then he nodded and barked orders that cracked like whips. Bree, on day shift overtime, took charge of welding brackets for the temporary beams. Sparks erupted around her like a meteor shower, lighting her grin. "Told my girls engineers fix problems. Guess I'd better prove it," she shouted over the sizzle. By dusk, for slender micropiles drilled through the slurry to bedrock, transferring the station's weight to patience and steel. We pumped grout until the earth stopped swallowing light. Only when the gauges leveled did my legs start shaking. That night, shower steam couldn't scrub away the image of that drooping pier. But exhaustion carried a silver edge, proof again that competence can outpace catastrophe, at least for one gritty Friday. Saturday dawned soft and forgiving, as if the city had stayed up all night holding its breath for us and could finally exhale. I slept past sunrise luxury until my phone pinged with a photo from Bree. Her twins, aprons smeared crimson with food color lava, posed beside 2 papier-mâché volcanoes that looked suspiciously like recycled coffee cans. They erupted perfectly. So did the applause, the caption read. Pride spread through me, warm as August asphalt. At noon I biked the Three Rivers Trail, letting wind unravel the week's knots. Beneath the 16th Street Bridge a busker squeezed Springsteen from a battered accordion, and for once I allowed myself to just listen, no calculations, no contingency plans, only the old refrain. We learned more from a 3-minute record than we ever learned in school. I tossed a 5 into his open case and pedaled on lighter. Yet resilience can't resist a checklist. By mid-afternoon I was back at my kitchen table, blueprints splayed like a patchwork quilt. I reran soil-bearing equations, double-checked micropile spacing, drafted the incident report corporate would expect Monday. Denise called mid-paragraph. Heard you went rogue, she teased. My shoulders tensed until her laugh followed. Good. Rogue keeps buildings standing. She paused, softer. Take tomorrow off, okay? Even skyscrapers need cure time. Dusk found me on the stoop beside Alma, my upstairs neighbor who practices cello at impossible hours. She handed over a mason jar of cold brew. Your jackhammer lullabies inspired a new piece, she said. We sat shoulder to shoulder, sipping coffee dark as river water. She spoke of audition politics at the symphony. I spoke of budget politics on site. Different stages, same patriarchy. She raised her jar. To women who refused to be background noise. We clinked, caffeine mingling with defiance. Near midnight, I traced the station's silhouette under lamplight, arches echoing the bridges beyond, and whispered one vow: you will open your doors standing tall, and every girl who walks through will know she belongs here. Thunder rumbled far off, distant, undecided. I smiled, closed the drawings, and let the storm come. Sunday was a sanctioned Sabbath, Denise's orders, yet my body woke at 6, tuned to the hum of imaginary generators. I resisted habit, rolling onto the cool side of the pillow, letting stillness seep into my bones. Outside, church bells threaded the quiet, solemn and slow, and for the first time in months I answered their call, not to pews, but to presence. By 9, Alma texted, "Art museum? Free admission till noon." I met her beneath a limestone facade that gleamed like newly ground marble. Inside, sunlight poured through skylights, bathing canvases in liquid gold. We wandered without agenda until a massive Rothko stopped me, two bands of color vibrating against each other, tension and calm in a single breath. Alma asked what I saw. "Load paths," I joked, then shook my head. "Actually, resilience. Colors refusing to merge yet holding the same frame." She smiled, as if the painting had confirmed a secret she already knew. We lunched at a food truck, kimchi tacos, and sprawled on the museum lawn where children chase bubbles bigger than their heads. Alma confessed she feared her audition panel would hear only mistakes, not music. I shared how every misaligned bolt feels like a referendum on my worth. We both laughed at the symmetry, then drafted a pact on a napkin. When self-doubt shouts, we phone each other before it finishes the sentence. She folded the napkin into a tiny crane and slipped it in my pocket. Back home, afternoon light slanted through my crooked windows, spotlighting dust motes swirling like tiny galaxies. I unearthed a shoebox of keepsakes, my first tape measure, dented, a Polaroid of 12-year-old me wearing Dad's oversized tool belt while he framed our treehouse. In the photo, he's smiling wide, but I remember his words even clearer than that grin. "Measure true, kiddo, but dream bigger than the board." I pressed the picture to my chest, gratitude flooding every unfinished corner inside me. Night crept in, scented with honeysuckle and distant diesel. I laid out tomorrow's sight clothes, slipped Alma's paper crane onto the dresser, and whispered a builder's prayer. May my backbone stay plumb, my courage level, and my voice louder than the doubts that echo in steel. Monday broke like a cymbal crash, bright, brash, impossible to ignore. I wheeled onto site with the sun still yawning, coffee steaming in my travel mug, and Alma's paper crane riding the dashboard. The micropile cap had cured overnight. Inspectors would arrive by 8 to bless or condemn our emergency fix. My stomach jittered, half caffeine, half dread. I started with a pre-shift safety huddle. Helmets circled me like petals around a nervous bud. "We patched the wound," I told them, voice firm, "but today we check the stitches." Leon cracked a grin. Bree bumped my elbow with her welding glove. Their faith was a silent shoulder beneath my words. At 7:57, 2 city inspectors strode in, clipboards, neon vests pristine, and launched into ritual. Torque tests, ultrasonic scans, a barrage of questions sharp enough to nick pride. I tracked each reading on my tablet, numbers stabilizing into the sweet green zone. But when they reached the last pile head, the senior inspector frowned. "Grout surface shrinkage crack," he muttered. A thin fissure, hairline but visible, raced like lightning across the cap. Gus's jaw tightened. I knelt, running a glove over the line. Mere surface tension, no depth. Still, inspectors love certainty like welders love sparks. I thumbed my tablet, pulled up thermal cure graphs averaged from sensors we'd embedded. Thank every past self that stubbornly overdocuments. Hydration heat peaked at 3 a.m., I explained. That line's cosmetic, compressive strength is 60% above spec. I handed him the graph. He studied it, then exhaled through his teeth, approval's quiet cousin, and scribbled acceptable on the form. Relief hissed out of the crew like steam from a valve, but I held them a moment longer. "We don't accept barely safe," I said. "We aim for undeniably solid." Bree raised her helmet in salute. The others mirrored her, a brief, bright field of orange shells catching morning light. After they dispersed, the corporate suits reappeared, brandishing a revised materials list. Cheaper anchor bolts this time. I squared my shoulders. "Remember Friday?" I asked, tapping the fresh acceptance stamp. "We saved the budget's reputation by refusing shortcuts. Let's keep that trend." Suit 1 sighed, Suit 2 adjusted his tie. Neither argued. Lunch found me on the half-finished platform, boots dangling above Saturday's battle zone, sipping tepid coffee and watching river barges shove against the current. The water kept it slow, Stubborn course, unconcerned with deadlines or dividends, carving its path the only way it knew, persistent, patient, unstoppable. I took another sip and decided to do the same. Tuesday unfolded like fresh blueprint paper, crisp, inviting, but ready to crease if I wasn't careful. We were a week out from the topping out ceremony, the moment the last beam soars into place and everyone pretends deadlines don't still loom. Gus had ordered evergreen boughs for luck. I'd ordered extra paint pens so every hand, laborer, welder, janitor, exec, could sign the steel. Morning briefing barely ended before an ironworker named Mateo sidled over, cheeks bright. "My sister's shadowing today," he said, jerking a thumb toward a teen in scuffed sneakers and star-spangled safety glasses. Her name was Luna, 16 and spark-eyed, curious as a wrench on a fresh bolt. I paired her with Bree, confident the station would gain another disciple before lunch. Corporate sent yet another email pushing for a more economical handrail spec. I fired back photos of Luna tracing weld seams, explaining why proper stanchion spacing keeps travelers from tumbling onto tracks. "Economical is meaningless if people bleed," I wrote, pulse strumming send. 10 minutes later the cost-cut request disappeared like a bad patch behind new drywall. Small victory, large grin. Mid-afternoon Alma texted SOS. Audition moved up to tonight, terrified. I replied with a selfie, me, steel beam, marker poised. "Write your name on the music," I captioned, then play it so loud no one forgets the architect. A minute later, she sent back a voice memo, 3 rising cello notes, sure and steady. I tucked the sound between ribs and got back to work. At dusk, we prefit the ceremonial beam on sawhorses. Crew circled, swapping jokes and Sharpies. Luna hesitated until I handed her the silver pen. "You first," I said. She printed her name in looping letters, then whispered, "Someday I'll build something bigger than this." I felt the night tilt, just slightly, toward a future wider than the river. Later, alone in the trailer, I pressed Alma's crane against the fresh signatures. Paper, ink, and steel, all proof that the stories we draft in quiet hearts can turn solid enough to hold up trains, dreams, and every girl who hasn't yet found her footing. The topping out dawn broke electric blue, as if the sky itself had dressed up for the party. Gus grumbled about winds aloft, but his grin kept betraying him. I tucked Alma's paper crane into my vest pocket and strode onto the deck where the final beam, white primed, graffitied with names and tiny doodles, waited for flight. Before the lift, I called the crew to a half circle. "Every signature on this deal is a promise," I began, voice carrying across scaffolds. "A promise that we refuse shortcuts, that we leave room for the next Luna, the next Bree, the next any of us who ever wondered if we belonged." Helmets nodded, welders wiped sweat streaks, leaving clean stripes on dirty cheeks. The crane operator eased the bucket, chain links humming. As the beam floated skyward, Bree started a slow clap that caught like sparks on dry grass, boots stomping, gloves slapping steel. My pulse drummed in time while the beam slid into its cradle and bolts kissed threads. Gus torqued the first nut, then handed the wrench to Luna, whose hands shook only until the metal clicked home. Cheers erupted, reverberating through girders and straight into my ribcage. An hour later, inspection stamps dried, I slipped away to a quiet corner of the platform. Cell service stuttered, then Alma's name lit my screen. Her whisper quivered, "I got the seat, they chose me." Wind whipped her words, but joy cut through like a welder's arc. I told her I'd saved a spot on the ceremonial beam for one more signature, hers. Dusk painted the river molten copper as the crew dispersed. I lingered, tracing my fingers over rough primer, over my own name, small letters but indelible. Below, commuter trains threaded the city, their whistles a new kind of jackhammer, softer, but still carving space. I pressed the paper crane against the steel and breathed deep. Somewhere a cello would soon sing its first notes in a grand hall. Somewhere a teenage girl would tell her friends she tightened the bolt that holds history. And here, suspended between sky and water, I finally felt the city's pulse sync with my own, steady, defiant, and irrevocably home.